April 12, 1943. North Africa. The desert wind howled across the dunes as Oberstfreiter Hans Keller squinted through the smoke of a burning panzer. The once proud Afrika Corps, the Desert Fox's men, was finished. Allied tanks rumbled over the horizon, their dust clouds blotting out the sun. Keller clutched his canteen, bone dry for 2 days, and looked toward the approaching column of American trucks. He'd heard stories that the Americans treated prisoners like animals, that surrender meant humiliation. But at that moment, with his stomach twisting and lips cracked from thirst, he no longer cared. By dusk, the captured Germans were loaded into open trucks under guard. The convoy moved west toward the coast, headlights flickering against the black desert. In the back of one truck, Keller sat beside Feldwebel Otto Bauer, a grizzled veteran who'd fought since Poland. "Enjoy the ride," Bauer muttered, half smiling. "They'll feed us before shooting us." The younger men laughed weakly, the kind of laugh born from exhaustion rather than humor. 2 weeks later, Keller's world changed again. After a crowded sea voyage on a U.S. Liberty ship, he disembarked at a bustling port in Virginia. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of pine, so different from the dry North African heat. Along the docks, American soldiers shouted orders over the roar of diesel engines. Warehouses stretched into the distance, stacked high with crates marked rations and coffee, beans. It was a sight none of the prisoners could believe. America, it seemed, was a land overflowing with everything Germany had run out of. Inside the holding camp, the men were lined up for processing. Keller watched as American medics inspected their health, offering vaccinations and clean uniforms. The next morning, the prisoners were marched to the mess hall, a long wooden building filled with the scent of sizzling bacon and freshly baked bread. When Keller sat down, a guard handed him a metal tray loaded with scrambled eggs, toast, butter, a slice of ham, and even a cup of coffee. For a long moment, no one moved. The men stared at their plates as if it were a trick. Then Bauer leaned over his tray, eyes wide. "Mein Gott," he whispered, "this is real food." They ate in silence, half afraid someone might take it away. Outside, the camp was quiet. Rows of wooden barracks surrounded by barbed wire, patrolled by young American guards who looked barely older than the prisoners themselves. To Keller's surprise, many guards smiled or nodded politely as they passed. One even asked, in broken German, "Good breakfast, Ja?" That night, lying on a clean cot for the first time in months, Keller couldn't sleep. He thought about his mother back in Hamburg, waiting in food lines for ration bread, about his younger brother on the Eastern Front, surviving on watery soup and horse meat. And here he was, a prisoner of the enemy, full for the first time since 1941. He whispered into the darkness, almost afraid of his own voice. "We've lost the war, Otto, even if we don't know it yet." Outside the barracks, the American flag fluttered under the floodlights, a symbol not just of victory, but of abundance. May 1943. Camp Swift, Texas. Dawn broke over the sprawling camp, painting the horizon in shades of orange and dust. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and cigarette smoke. Keller stood in line for roll call, the coarse American-issued uniform hanging loosely from his shoulders. Around him, thousands of German POWs stirred, engineers, clerks, tank crewmen, now farmers and laborers behind wire. Yet even here, in captivity, there was order. The Americans insisted on punctuality, hygiene, and daily work details. After breakfast, oatmeal, with sugar and a mug of coffee. The prisoners marched to the day's assignment. Some worked in nearby cotton fields. Others repaired fences or built wooden furniture for the camp. The guards carried rifles but rarely raised their voices. Keller noticed how different they were from the caricatures German propaganda had shown. No monsters, just young men from Kansas or Ohio doing their duty. During lunch, the men gathered beneath a makeshift awning. Today's meal was stew, thick, rich, with chunks of beef and potatoes. Bauer scooped up a spoonful and laughed. "My wife couldn't cook this well even before the war," he joked, drawing a few chuckles from the others. A guard passed by and tossed them an unopened pack of Lucky Strikes. "Compliments of the U.S. Army," he said. Keller held the pack in disbelief. Cigarettes were rarer than gold back home. By late afternoon, the Texas heat shimmered above the wire fences. Some prisoners played soccer in the open yard. Others wrote letters under the shade of a barrack wall. The camp commandant, Colonel James Whitaker, believed boredom was dangerous, so he allowed music, reading, even classes. Soon, a small orchestra formed, their instruments donated by local townsfolk. They played Beethoven and Schubert as the sun dipped below the horizon. And for a few brief minutes, the war outside the fence seemed to disappear. Letters from home began to arrive that summer. Keller's mother wrote about bombings in Hamburg, food shortages, and the ration cards that bought barely enough to survive. "We have no butter, no coffee, no sugar," she wrote. "Your sister trades clothing for bread." Keller read it twice, his eyes lingering on the words. Then he looked down at his dinner tray: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, peas, and even a slice of apple pie. He couldn't bring himself to eat for a long time. Later that night, Bauer said softly, "They don't even know how lucky we are, Hans. We're prisoners, and we live better than our families." It was true. Many POWs gained weight during captivity. The U.S. Army followed the Geneva Convention strictly, ensuring every prisoner received the same caloric intake as American troops, around 3,000 calories a day. It was more than double what civilians back in Germany received under rationing. Keller began keeping a small notebook, listing every meal, every kindness, as if to remind himself it wasn't a dream. The American guard seemed puzzled by their gratitude. One asked him, "What's so surprising about food?" Keller had no words for the gulf between their worlds, between a nation overflowing with supplies and another starving under siege. By autumn, the camp had its own newspaper, printed in German, and a small library stocked with donated books. Life settled into a strange rhythm of routine, comfort, and guilt. The men laughed, played chess, wrote poetry, all while their homeland burned. Some even wondered aloud whether captivity in America was not punishment but salvation. One evening, as the orchestra played softly under the dim yellow lights, Keller whispered to Bauer, "If we ever go home, will anyone believe this?" Bauer took a slow drag from his cigarette, the ember glowing in the dark. "No," he said. "They'll think we're lying." Outside the fence, the crickets sang in the Texas night, a lullaby for men who had once sworn to die for the Reich, now finding peace in the land of their enemy. January 1944. Camp Concordia, Kansas. Snow blanketed the prairie, softening the outlines of the barbed wire and wooden towers. Inside the camp, a small Christmas tree stood in the recreation hall, decorated with scraps of paper and bits of foil saved from ration tins. A handmade sign above it read, "Frohe Weihnachten." The Americans had allowed it. They even supplied a few turkeys and crates of oranges, a miracle to men who hadn't seen fresh fruit in years. Keller sat beside the potbelly stove, his hands warming against the iron. He was sketching the camp's watchtower. In his notebook, when the door creaked open, Sergeant Miller, one of the guards, stepped in with his usual grin. "Mail call," he shouted. A line quickly formed. The POWs waited, their faces tense. Letters from home could carry joy or heartbreak in equal measure. When Keller's name was called, he tore the envelope open eagerly. His mother's handwriting trembled across the page. "Our home was destroyed in the last air raid," it read. "We live with Aunt Lotte now. We hear the Russians are close to the border." He closed the letter slowly. Across the room, Bauer looked up from his own envelope, eyes wet. "My cousin was drafted at 16, he whispered. "They're calling up boys now." The room was silent except for the crackle of the stove. Around them, America felt impossibly distant from that world of ash and hunger. Outside the wire, trucks delivered sacks of flour, vegetables, even fresh milk. Some POWs worked nearby on local farms, earning small wages for helping American farmers harvest wheat. They were treated fairly, sometimes even invited to share a meal with the families. Keller had joined one of those details, and one day, after stacking hay bales, he was offered a cold bottle of Coca-Cola. He'd never seen anything like it, a glass bottle sweating in the sun, filled with dark, fizzing liquid. The farmer's teenage son grinned. "Go on, try it." Keller took a sip, and the sweetness nearly made him cough. He couldn't believe something so simple could taste like happiness. When he returned to camp that evening, Bauer asked, "What's it like?" Keller laughed. "Like drinking sugar and lightning." That winter, rumors spread through the camp of Germany's retreat on every front, of Allied bombers pounding Berlin, of ration cards reduced to scraps. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The defeated soldiers were living better than the citizens they had fought to defend. In one camp newspaper, a prisoner wrote anonymously, "We thought we fought for civilization, but here we see what it actually looks like." Some men began to question everything: the propaganda, the ideology, the promises. The guards noticed it too. They often discussed democracy, the Constitution, freedom, not as lectures, but as conversations over fence posts or during work details. To many prisoners, it was the first time they had heard such ideas without fear. One evening, Sergeant Miller lingered by the barracks fence, smoking. He looked at Keller and said, "When this is over, you'll go home and rebuild. Maybe better than before." Keller nodded, though he wasn't sure. "If home still exists," he said quietly. By spring, the snow melted, leaving the camp surrounded by wildflowers and tall grass. The orchestra still played, but their music had changed, lighter, more hopeful, as if the prairie itself had seeped into their souls. Even the guards listened, leaning against the fence posts under the twilight sky. Keller often thought of the irony that captivity had shown him freedom, and the enemy had shown him kindness. Sometimes, when the wind blew through the wire, carrying the scent of distant wheat fields, he'd close his eyes and imagine a Germany where people didn't fight for domination but for dignity. He didn't know when he would see home again, but he knew, deep down, that the world he'd return to would never be the same, and neither would he. May 8, 1945. Camp Concordia, Kansas. The air was warm and still. In the distance, the camp loudspeakers crackled to life, a young American corporal's voice echoing across the yard. "Germany has surrendered. The war is over." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then came murmurs, scattered whispers, the sound of disbelief. Some men cheered quietly. Others stared at the ground, their faces hollow. Bauer removed his cap and bowed his head. "So that's it," he said softly. "All that fighting. For nothing." The guards didn't gloat. They simply watched, understanding the weight of what had just been lost. That evening, Colonel Whitaker gathered the German camp leaders and read the official statement. From General Eisenhower, there would be repatriation, but not yet. The prisoners would remain until arrangements were made, months perhaps. The Americans wanted to ensure Europe was stable before sending them home. In the following weeks, the atmosphere in camp shifted. The barbed wire still stood, but it no longer felt like a prison. Work details continued, yet the tension had drained away. Some prisoners volunteered to help rebuild nearby towns, repairing fences or painting barns. American families began inviting them for Sunday dinners. Keller, now lean but healthy, was a favorite among the children. They loved hearing his accent when he tried to pronounce hamburger. One afternoon, as he helped harvest wheat, the farmer's wife handed him a brown paper bag. Inside were sandwiches, an apple, and a small folded note that simply read, "For your journey home. Thank you." Keller held it for a long time, unable to speak. Back in camp, Bauer approached him with news. "They're sending us home. Ship leaves next month." Keller didn't answer right away. He looked across the field, at the guard towers, the rows of barracks, the flag fluttering in the wind. "Strange," he said finally. "We came here as enemies, and I'm leaving with gratitude." The final morning came quickly. Trucks lined up to take the men to the port. American guards shook hands with the prisoners, not as victors, but as equals. Sergeant Miller found Keller near the gate. "Guess this is it," he said, offering a handshake. Keller hesitated, then saluted instead. "You showed us respect," he said quietly. "That's something I'll never forget." Miller smiled. "That's America for you, Hans. We fight hard, but we feed our prisoners." On the ship bound for Europe, the sea was calm. Keller leaned against the railing, watching the horizon blur into the clouds. He opened his mother's last letter, the one that had arrived just before departure. "Our home is gone," she wrote, "but we are alive. Come home when you can, my son." He folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. He thought of the food, the cigarettes, the music, all the things he'd never expected to find in captivity. He thought of Bauer's laughter, of the guards' kindness, of the night skies over Texas that had seemed endless and free. Most of all, he thought of the lesson buried beneath it all, that decency could survive even in war. Months later, when he finally stepped onto German soil, the cities were unrecognizable, rubble, ash, and silence. His mother met him at the train station, her face thinner but her eyes the same. When he told her about America, she listened in disbelief. They fed you meat? Coffee? She asked, shaking her head. In a prison? Keller smiled faintly. Yes, he said. And they gave us hope too. He never forgot it. In the years that followed, as Germany rebuilt from ruin, he often spoke to young men about what he'd learned, not from the war, but from his captors. That respect, compassion, and fairness could outlast hatred. That sometimes the true victors were not those who conquered, but those who kept their humanity. And in that distant camp, behind barbed wire and under a foreign flag, Hans Keller learned that lesson the hard way, through kindness he never expected, in a place he never wanted to be.